Hi, you're looking for a new home. You come across two units, separate buildings, similar area, and they're similar in style, size, and appearances on photos online. Yet you see that the pricing is very different and the monthly fee can vary widely. What's the deal? Well, you have two different forms of ownership here. And if you don't understand what that is, you could get yourself into a little bit of trouble, cost yourself some money, and even more importantly, cost yourself some time. What's the difference between a condo and a co-op? That's what we're going to go over in the next couple of minutes here. Most people have no idea the difference between these two forms of ownership and these two types of properties. They're not as common here in the DMV and in Montgomery County as they are in some parts of the country, but there are enough of them around here. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you could be surprised. So I want to go over what the real difference is in ownership, why co-ops can be cheaper, but not always better, and talk about the hidden risks and surprises that can come along the way. We'll first talk about the biggest difference in what you actually own when you're considering a condo versus a co-op. With a condo, you actually own real estate. You have a tax record. You can be found online. With a co-op, you don't own real estate. You own shares in a corporation that gives you the ability to live in that property by way of a proprietary lease. So you don't actually own real estate at all if you own a co-op, but you do if you own a condo. So you could have two similar spaces, same layout, similar kitchens, but they're vastly different from a legal standpoint and what you in fact own and how you buy it. And that difference is what drives everything else we're going to talk about today. With a condo, you actually own, as I mentioned, real estate. You get a separate property tax bill, and your ownership is listed in the public record. With a co-op, you don't get a separate tax bill. The taxes are built into the monthly fee, and in many cases, the ownership is not recorded the same way publicly, which can be a good thing if that's what you're looking for, but realize that you're not part of the public record when you own a co-op. The benefit of all this, if you own a co-op or are buying a co-op, is some level of privacy. So you can't be found as easily on the public record and online. So there is a measure of privacy, there's a measure of anonymity that comes along with owning a co-op. So that can be a benefit if that's what you're looking for. But that benefit can come with some trade-offs. One thing you're going to notice when you're comparing units between condos and co-ops is a vast difference in the monthly fee. Condo, you're paying for the monthly expenses that the condo association incurs as they pertain to your unit. In a co-op, there is more, quite a bit more. The fee for a co-op usually includes real estate taxes. That's how you pay your taxes. They include the usual stuff that a condo might include. Sometimes, and in many cases, there will be utilities included in that, and sometimes even maintenance. One thing that's not understood by most folks is that in many cases, a co-op, there is what's called an underlying or blanket mortgage. There's a mortgage that you have a share of for improvements that the association made, and every unit owner has a portion of that. It's referred to as the blanket mortgage or the underlying mortgage. It's not in your name, but you are responsible for it, and you're responsible for a portion of it, and it transfers with the property when you buy it. So in addition to your monthly mortgage payment, in addition to your usual and customary fees, in addition to your real estate taxes, you may have to account for a certain amount of money per month that goes towards that blanket or underlying mortgage that is associated with your unit. And in some cases, that can be quite expensive. It can be quite a large sum on a monthly basis. So you have to factor that in because it is going to impact your financing. If you could afford and were qualified for, let's say, $500,000 condo purchase, you may not be able to qualify for the same amount in a co-op purchase because that portion of the underlying mortgage is also going to be factored into your debt ratios. So it's going to limit, in some cases, how much you can actually purchase. So when you're wondering why that monthly fee is so high, that could be one of the big parts of it, that underlying or blanket mortgage portion that you are responsible for as a unit owner in a co-op, in addition to the real estate taxes and everything else that gets calculated in. One of the biggest problems that one runs into when trying to purchase a co-op as opposed to a condo is the actual financing. Not all lenders provide financing for the purchase of a co-op. In fact, many do not. And in many cases, the financing that is provided comes with restrictions on what the down payment needs to be. It may have higher interest rates. The financial requirements may be stricter. And the co op itself does have some say through their approval process, which we'll talk about shortly, as to whether you financially are capable of making the purchase. So, one downside of making a co op purchase is that the number of lenders that you can actually use drops off pretty fast. There are way fewer lenders that deal in co-op financing than particular. There are way fewer lenders that participate in co-op financing as opposed to condo financing. So the lender options shrink fast. And even once you are approved by the lender, that doesn't mean you're approved by the co-op. That's what I'm going to talk about next. Typically, if you're buying a condo, once you're under contract, you're just moving towards settlement. You're getting your financial information to the lender so they can fully underwrite you and get there. And usually there's not much of an issue, especially if you've already been pre-approved by a reputable lender. The same thing is not necessarily true with a co-op because now there is a board approval process that all co-ops, to one degree or another, have you participate in. And that review can involve a full financial review. It could involve a background review. And sometimes it can even involve an interview. Now, the approval process for a co-op has changed a bit over the years because some co-ops were under the microscope because they were practicing discriminatorily in that approval process. So they've begun to have to exercise care on what data they use to approve you. In the past, they could disavow any approval during the interview, which could open them up to discriminatory practices. That part of the process is not nearly as common as it used to be. So typically now it's on background review, it's on your financials, that sort of thing. But there are some condos still that do actually meet face to face, and that can impinge and impact your approval process. And the bottom line is the co op, even though you're approved by your lender and you're ready to go, the co op board can say no. You can be fully qualified and still not be approved. If that weren't enough, know that there are transactional differences when you're buying a condo as opposed to a co op. Condo is pretty straightforward. You have a contract, you have a title company, you have a deed, transfer taxes, pretty typical. A condo is not much different than buying a single family home or townhouse. A co op, on the other hand, most settlement companies do not have the ability to make the transfer. Transfer agents, as they are called, must know exactly how a co op functions, how it is legally, and how the transfer gets made. If they don't know, it can cause a big problem. Bottom line on this purchase is that you're not buying the real estate, as we mentioned before. You're buying shares in the corporation. There may not be a deed recorded, and the closing costs are different as well in most cases. Now, used to be that if you bought a co-op in DC, you avoided transfer taxes. Well, the local government got wise to that. So even if you buy at a co-op and you're not having a transfer of actual real estate, you still have to pay the transfer and recordation taxes in DC. But in some jurisdictions, you still do save some money because since it's not an actual real estate transaction, you may save money on the transfers because they're not collected because this is not a real estate transaction technically. So you want to make sure that you're working with a transfer agent that knows this particular co-op, has done them before, and can handle all the legal necessities that go along with it. Otherwise, there could be trouble at the very end. Okay, let's say you got through all of that, you settled, and now you have a place. So what are the differences going forward? Well, condos often are easier to rent. They're easier to sell. They appreciate more in most cases, and they have a larger buyer pool because more people are interested in condos than they are co-ops. With a co-op, there are often very strict rental restrictions. There is a smaller buyer pool, and there are more steps involved when you do sell. Remember that underlying mortgage. So while in many cases co-ops are less expensive, doesn't make them any easier to sell in some cases, and that's something to watch for. When you're making that purchase, you want to pay attention to that for down the road. So, in summary, condos are easier to make the purchase. They're more flexible. You have more options for financing. Generally, they're easier to sell and easier to buy, and they're the vast majority of types of property in this area. Co-ops, on the other hand, often sell for a lower cost than a similarly laid out and sized condo. So that's one benefit. You also potentially have more privacy and some degree of anonymity by owning a co-op, so you're not on the public record. The monthly fee, since it's all in and often includes things like utilities and real estate taxes, keeps a few surprises going forward as far as your monthly costs go. But there often are more restrictions and more complexity to making the purchase and then owning it as you go forward. In Montgomery County and across the DMV, most buyers will lean more towards a condo than a co-op. There are way more condos in the area than there are co-ops in the first place. The process is a bit more straightforward with a condo. There are less hoops to jump through, but under the right circumstances, a co-op can be the exact right thing for you. So look at all your options, decide what's best for you, and then knowing all the information you need, you can get to settlement easily and enjoy your property once you have it. Either one can make sense as long as you know what you're getting into. Anyway, hope this helps. Happy hunting and enjoy your new home.